can't see me. It's all right. You don't have to see me. All right. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to put limits on our private variables. So we're gonna hard code limits on our private variables. So step 3 is identify limits on our private variables. That is maximum and minimum values, max and min values they can have. Min values they can have, and then make those private static or public static final, public static final variables. Okay? Now remember, static means that it belongs to the class, so we say it binds to, well, let's get into that in a second. Static means that every instance of the class has the same exact variable. Okay, so the variable is shared over every instance of the class. Okay, final means you set it and forget it. It's Java's way of doing a constant. Okay, so it means can be set once and never set again for the run of that program, right? And public means it can be accessed from outside. Accessed from outside. Typically, if something is final, since it's a constant and it's set immediately, we usually set it immediately in here, we're able to access it from outside because nobody can change it, all right? And so there's a few things going on here. Let's make our first public static final variable, and it can go either way. You can say final first or static first. These modifiers are modifiers to variables, and they work flipped or in any order you want to do them. So whatever you feel. So let's say we wanted to make it so that neither the x velocity or the y velocity can be greater than 5, right? Which means it won't jump more than 5 pixels a second. That's the maximum speed. We might say something like public static final int max velocity equals 5, okay? And that's our limit on both the x and y velocity. Now, we could have different limits on the x and y velocity, and that would be fine too. We just decided to make it one limit for both of them, okay? For the max x and y velocity. And while we're at it, we can make a minimum one. Public static final int min velocity equals -5, all right? Remember, the negative velocity just means it's going in the other direction, right? If we have, well, we'll draw it out in a second. Very cool. All right. So, what does that mean? So, what does static mean? Well, static means it doesn't bind to the an instance of the class. It binds to the actual class. So, let's be specific about this. So, my ball and my ball 2, I have 2 instances of ball here. Oh, and I also added colors. So if you're playing along at home, feel free to add 3 private variables for colors, and feel free to add this my ball too. And I just wanted to show you an example here of what static actually means. So x position and y position. So my ball and my ball 2 can have a different x position and y position. Okay, they could be at different places on the board. They can have a different x velocity and y velocity. They could be moving at different pixels per frame, okay? They can have a different ball width and ball height. We might have a small ball and we might have a big ball, okay? And they can have a different color, right? They might have different values for red, green, and blue. But they share the same exact max velocity and they share the same exact min velocity, okay? And that's what static means, okay? Another way to say this, so if I can say something like my ball dot, and I could say I could grab this variable max velocity. Remember, it's public, and I could say max velocity. All right, and that is nice and legal. Okay, I can system.out.println system.out.println print line max velocity, and it'll print out the max velocity. We can do that real quickly, just so you can see it. And it said 5, all right? And that's exactly what it is, okay? It's 5, all right? I can also do the same for my ball 2, and it'll be the same exact value. It'll be 5, okay? And there it is again. It's 5. Trust me, the program ran again, okay? Now, if it's static, I don't even have to have an instance to access the variable, because this variable, instead of binding to an instance, my ball and my ball 2, we say it binds to the actual class. So these private variables bind to the object or the instance of the class. They each have different versions of this, right? But this binds to the class itself, meaning we can access this without an instance even in existence by just saying ball.maxVelocity. Nice and legal. And if we hit play, it'll say 5. Okay, we can't do that with the private variables, but we can do it with our public variables that allow it to us to access it from outside the class, and static, which means that it binds to the actual class itself, doesn't bind to instances of the class or objects of the class, and so we can actually access it. And then anything else? Oh yeah, final means that it's constant. One final thing, real funny. One final thing here is that, right, static and final modify integers. They're called modifiers to the type. So static, final, and then the type is still an integer, right? That still defines the box in memory. Now, one final thing is that I started doing this capitalized underscore format, and that's the common convention for final variables. They're constants, actually, so for final constants, I sometimes say final variables, but really they're not variables. They can't vary. You set them once and they're done, right? And so we do this to let people who are reading our code know real quickly that, oh, these things are our constants that set limits on our private variables, okay? Now, the advantage of this is if we somehow later on say, oh, well, 5 is too small of a max velocity, we need to ramp the speed of this thing up, well, then we can easily change this to 10 and minus 10, and it'll be changed throughout our code. And so that's the advantage of making limits up here rather than hard coding limits in the actual constructor or setters, for example. And we'll see that in the very next video, in fact, when we go into the constructor. So the point of this is to review static and final, these two keywords. Static means it's the same among all instances of the class, right? Which means that my ball and my ball 2 share the same exact value for that, okay? And it also means that it binds to the class itself, all right? Meaning that that we can access this variable by just saying ball.maxVelocity, all right? Which is nice, actually. It means that both of these instances share the same exact max velocity variable, which is actually meaning that it's taking up less space in memory, right? Because you don't have to have a separate copy for each of these, okay? And final means it's a constant. It means that once we set it, we can't set it again. And one more thing is that by convention, we can set these things right when we declare them. So we have created our static final variables, and we set them immediately so that people who are reading our code can see what limits we've put on things. Okay, so when you want to put limits, that's step 3, make them public static finals. Okay, a good rule of thumb. See you in the next video. He said, and then tried to find the stop button.